right. Hello, everybody. This is Andy Pace, Non-Toxic Environments. So good to be with you all again this week. We have a really interesting show for you this week. We want to talk about the construction process of custom home building itself. It is not going to be a show specifically on building healthy homes. And I want to state that right away, because I want to get more into the entire process of construction home building. And this is going to be true whether it is a healthy home project, a traditional project that is not focusing on that. We want to talk about the custom home building process because there's a lot involved in it, and making incremental changes here and there to improve certain aspects of it can be done in any project, of course. But there's a lot to talk about just in the process of putting things together, even before the hole gets stuck in the ground. So I would like to introduce to you Jeff Burg. Jeff is honestly, he's a family friend. I've known him for it's got to be close to 30 years now, Jeff. And he and I have worked together on some projects over the years, and I'm very happy to call him an acquaintance and a friend and a business partner of sorts. And so, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's really good to have you here. Oops, I'm just gonna do some bringing into the got some other people added into the mix here. Hold on a second. All right, Jeff, thank you again for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So before we get started on the process of construction, give me a little idea about how did you get into this? I mean, it dates back to when you were a kid, right?
It does. As a teenager, growing up, I always joke that I was born with a hammer in my hand because my father was a carpenter contractor. So that's how my love for construction began. And early on, I was down in the basement, literally building whatever I could. And when I turned 14, my summer vacation was spent working on a rough carpentry crew, and I just absolutely loved it. And that's where I ended up moving. With my profession, I could have gone to college on a scholarship, but I wasn't really interested in that. I was more interested in being out in the field and pounding nails and being out in the elements. So that's how I got into it early on, and it just kind of, I guess, morphed into becoming a builder. And back 40 years ago, a lot of the carpenter contractors did turn into builders. It's just kind of how it evolved. Mine was, I guess, it was a very similar path, but I knew when I went into the business as far as building homes, I didn't want to be a track builder. I wanted to be more of a custom home builder, where it was a little bit more challenging versus trying to build the same cookie cutter home over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's obviously the attraction of building your own home and having something designed and built for you is the fact that it's not going to look like the neighbors and the subdivision and so forth. But that is the challenge, and it's not only a challenge for you as the builder, but a challenge for the customer themselves. So walk us through the process. A couple comes to you and says, we want to build a home. We've done our research, and Jeff, your company is the company we want to go with. What's the first step for them?
The first step that we do is, I usually have them sign a design consulting agreement with myself, so that that allows me to kind of walk them through the entire process. And then the first thing that we do is we interview architects, typically 2 or 3, and we ask a lot of questions and kind of let them, sell themselves. But we want to make sure that it's an interview, just like anything. Clients are interviewing me and vice versa. But we're making sure that not only does the price tag make sense as far as what their services are going to cost, but that their design background around is going to fit for the client, but more importantly, that their personalities mesh, because they're, as you know, not everyone gets along with everyone. So it's very important that if we're going to be designing a new custom home, that you get along with this, architect. So that's the beginning of that process. And then we go, collaboratively, the client and I will talk about each of the different architects and decide who's the better fit based on, again, personality, based on cost, what they can provide for the client. And then from there, we move forward with that particular architect. And then I'll be part of all the design meetings. So it's really important to have a builder part of your design, because if a client goes directly to an architect, that architect's going to put everything they want on a piece of paper without any consideration of budget and or process. And that's where having a builder like myself part of the process is really important, because I can bring my years of knowledge and experience to the table and say, hey, wait a minute, if we're doing this is going to add X amount of dollars to the cost of the project. And I'm totally fine with that if you are, but I just want you to be considerate of that, because if you're really stuck on a budget number, then we have to really consider whether or not we want to include, this option or square footage or something like that. Once we get through that whole design process, which usually takes, depending on the client, somewhere between, I would say, 4 and 6 months to have something that is a complete set of construction drawings, which is also the set of plans that we'll use for permitting. I will take those plans and I send them out to bid. So when we're going through the design process, we're talking about numbers and budgets, but it's kind of based a little loosely on square footage cost, because I try to explain to everyone, I can build a 3,000 square foot house that's literally a box, or I can build a 3,000 square foot house that has a couple bump outs on it. It's impossible that it can be the same cost. So because we're starting with a blank piece of paper and we're trying to work with a budget, we're just using general guidelines as far as square foot costs. Once they send those out, the plans out for bid, now we've really narrowed down that budget number, that cost, other than some of the allowances based on selections that ultimately have to be made. But now I can get that price honed down to where we need to make decisions on, okay, this is great, we can move forward, or hey, we have to make some adjustments. Some of those adjustments are literally what we call levers. It could be as simple as, okay, we included the lower level as part of the overall project, meaning a finished lower level. But you know what? Because we still want to move forward, but we need to cut costs, let's remove the cost of that basement. That way we get within our budget range and we can move forward and we can build that basement out any other time. But from that point, once we decided on if we're moving forward as is or removing some of those levers, then we go into contract. From contract, literally, once that's signed, I'm already working on procuring building permits and starting to schedule some of the subcontractors. So depending on the size of the house in today's world, if I step back a couple of years ago, I told every client, just anticipate a year from the day we dig to the day we move in. And that's just because of the way the economy kind of turned out after COVID, and as far as securing subcontractors and materials, everything just got stretched out so far. So this past year, things have really started to loosen up a little bit. And, I kind of told a past client the same thing, let's anticipate a year. And it turned out we were able to complete the house in about 9 months. So I can feel that it's softening, I guess, as far as labor goes and as far as materials.
That's great to hear. And that's certainly something I want to talk about a little bit more, the whole, what the pandemic did to the industry. But a couple of things I want to touch on that you mentioned. First of all is working with an architect. I talk about this with all my clients nationwide, that if you're going to be building a new home, it is very important not just to have a draftsperson, but a true architect working on the project, because of the issues like codes, and structural engineering and so forth, and also being up on the latest materials and methods, of course, but then coupling it with your experience as the home builder. I can harken back to when I was in commercial construction. And when I was in commercial construction, working with commercial architects, the actual person, the architect working on the drawings, was not the person who was putting together the budget for the project. And so we used to have this saying that they would design the Taj Mahal and let somebody else figure out how to build it and how to pay for it. And so that's kind of what happens when you involve an architect without involving you or involving the builder, to kind of pull back the reins a little bit to say, all right, maybe we're going a little too far in this direction. Here's more of the intent of what the customer wants. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, it really does make sense to have the builder involved just because of that. And a lot of times, there's a different thought process, especially when you go through design. Some people say, let's design it with everything we want, and then we can pull back. But the problem with that is I feel like whenever we pull back, we're never getting that full credit of if we would add it in at a later point in time. So that's why I'd rather design it to fit the budget. And then if you want to add it in later, I think it's just a better end result as far as cost goes.
That makes sense. I mean, it's very common for a subcontractor to have X amount in the price, and then they'll say, well, reduce this area by so and so. You would think it would reduce accordingly, the pricing accordingly with the area that they're doing, but it never does. It's always that extra cost that they have in for the change order. Right. So you also touched on this too, the concept that so many builders use across the country when they are talking about pricing, is to give their customers a price per square foot. And I don't mind using a price per square foot when it comes to a budget, or when it comes to after you've already had drawings complete and you can calculate what that price per square foot is. But to tell a customer beforehand that I can build you a home for $300 a square foot, and then the pricing finally comes back from all the trades and it's double that, that's what upsets me about the whole idea of using price per square foot as a budgetary method. Because before you have the drawings done, before you actually choose materials, you have no idea what the customer's tastes are. Do they want brass switch plate covers or plastic?
Right. That's exactly right. And that's why it's so hard to do that, especially early on in the process when you're just getting to know and meeting a client, and we're talking about budget numbers. We haven't talked about any finishes at all. And again, you kind of hit the nail on the head. And flooring is a perfect example, or hardwood floors. There's so many different varieties, and it's a different cost price for each one of them. And again, it really touches base on every product that you put in the house. Drywall, there's so many different textures you can put on the wall, and they all have a dollar value attached to it. So without really getting pretty far along into the process, it's really hard to gauge that budget number. But as you get through and you're working through that whole design process, that's when a lot of the information starts to come out from the clients, where they really like, hey, this is what I really like, or this is what I'm anticipating. Then you can start maybe, at least with the design process, fine tuning that square foot cost. It ultimately is not going to be perfect, but at least, I can go, hey, based on what you're telling me, I can tell that our budget number is going to be a little bit low and we need to bump that up a little bit. So, but it usually, it doesn't always work out perfect, but usually we're within a range, which is helpful, as long as the client goes into it knowing that, hey, there's going to be a range. It could go down 5%, it can go up 5%, based on a budget number, but we don't know that until we actually kind of bid it out based on what your preferences are.
Sure. And just to remind everybody, this is a custom home. This particular home that you're working on has never been done before. And right. If you had a set of 20 plans that you've built in the past, and you know what the costs involved were, and there's economies of scale when you're ordering similar things for similar homes, you can actually put together a budget number per square foot based upon what you just did last week. But in a custom home, everything has to be bid out, specially. So this makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and honestly, I've in the almost 32 years or 34 years that I've been building houses, I've only built the same house twice, and it wasn't exact, but it was very similar. But and then there's challenges with that actually, because I can build the same house, but when I put it on a different piece of property and I tweak it, the direction it's facing 10 degrees, it creates a whole different set of circumstances. And especially when it comes to, I'll say, roof lines and that, and snow. Now, if I turn it 5 degrees one direction, now I start getting snow drifts on the roofs or ice damming and stuff like that, that we never had that issue before. But now, because of the way it's positioned, now we've got different issues that we have to, kind of address. And you just don't understand that until you go through that whole process.
Yeah, it's amazing to think of all those little details. I just want to remind people who may have popped in the last few minutes. I'm speaking with Jeff Burg, the owner of JFK Design Build. Jeff is a friend that I've known for many years, a family friend, and I've worked with Jeff on projects over the years. And he's also here in Wisconsin with me. And we're talking about the custom home building process, not just healthy homes. We wanted to broaden this discussion into just custom home building in general, because there's so many questions that people have about the process, whether or not you incorporate healthier aspects into the project or not. These are still questions that are very, very important to discuss. So a couple of things you've touched on, I'd like to expand a little bit, is the post-COVID environment of construction. Now, I also want to remind folks that if you have a question, just enter it into the chat. And then if you'd like, you can start up your video and audio and ask it live. Otherwise, I can just read it out for you, which is perfectly fine too. And it doesn't have to be about, again, healthy homes. Let's talk about home building. It's a very, very big topic. And so post-COVID construction, I can tell you that throughout the pandemic, those years of working in this industry, we saw material prices fluctuating greatly. We saw labor shortages. We saw material shortages, of course. You've been able to manage through that, and you've been building throughout the pandemic, and seem to be coming out on the back end of this in good shape. So how did you manage doing that? Because it's been very difficult for a lot of companies.
It was an adjustment, that is for sure, and especially when it came to the labor. That was just a gigantic part of it, and the materials, I guess, just equally as big. And it was a rough road, because it was really setting the expectations for the client, and that's really what I was speaking about earlier, where when we could build a house 7 to 9 months, 10 years ago, once we get post-COVID, we're talking about a year plus. And specifically, I had 2 houses in the past year that they went closer to 15 months, and there's a lot of variables that created that. And part of it was the labor. I couldn't get the labor. The other part of it was the materials, and a third factor was the selection process with the clients. And so it's trying to, especially with the selections, it's really important to stress upon the clients, like, listen, I know it doesn't seem like anything's happening, meaning because I'm waiting for materials or labor, but let's keep making all these selections, because the sooner I can lock in on those and get them ordered, that's just going to help us on the backside of the project where we're getting closer to move in. But if we're making decisions late, then because there's a product shortage, now that's just going to keep pushing things back even further. So, but it was difficult. Some of probably the bigger challenges were price increases on some of the materials, where my suppliers just couldn't hold a cost. So we had built into our contracts an escalation clause that, if a supplier was being charged and passing that cost on to us, that we had to pass it on to the client. And then, but where I think that maybe we excelled from some of the other builders is that we wouldn't mark up or put our management fee on top of that additional charge.
Okay.
So where other companies may still continue to do that. So that, I know that the price went up for the client, but it didn't go up exponentially because I'm putting my markup on top of that. So, and hopefully most of those clients, understood that and were appreciative of that. But I know it's still a hard pill to swallow when you're expecting a cost of the house to be X amount of dollars based on our contract, but then, some of the materials go up like insulation or drywall. Lumber was a big one too. So it was tough.
Yeah. How far in advance would your subs and suppliers inform you of these price increases? I mean, was it something where at the start of their process of their component of the project, they would say, just so you know, our pricing is coming in higher than what we expected? I know that dealing with clients all over the country, people are telling me that, they'd be done with the home and all of a sudden they get another bill from the builders saying that, oh, by the way, lumber was $40,000 higher than we thought it was going to be.
Oh, gosh, no, I had nothing like that. It would be typically, as an example, if I would call for or start scheduling, let's say, the foundation or any type of the concrete work. Before they started that work, they would say, hey, by the way, I know we bid it out 3 months ago, but our material cost has come in higher. So before we start this, here's the new contract price, and it could be a $5,000 difference. So I knew that before we actually did it or did the work. It never came in after the fact. So now we've kind of gone through this process for 4 years now. Now some of the vendors are literally, when they send over a proposal when I'm bidding out the house, it'll say this number or bid is only good for 60 days or 30 days. Steel is one of the big ones that's only typically 30 days because that is just like a constantly moving target. So, and then there's some of the items that we just can't control or we can't even get updated pricing on. For example, if I'm putting in a well, I'm not putting that well in until maybe 4 months into the process sometimes. So they can't even give me a number until they're literally moving or mobilizing to the project.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that is tough. And of course the feeling we always get is, okay, prices keep on going up, but do they ever come down? And so luckily I can tell you as a material supplier, we actually have seen some of our vendors sending out price lists now that show a reduction almost down to the levels of pre-COVID, which is really encouraging. Of course, I don't think the labor rates will ever come back down again, but I mean, what's your take on that? What do you see the future holding on pricing?
Yeah, labor, things have to get really bad before the labor will ever change their pricing. Then they're really fighting for work. Everyone's so busy now that I don't see that happening anytime soon. As far as materials, it's always, in my mind, it takes this huge spike. And then when things start to settle down, yeah, the material costs come back down, but it never gets back to the levels they were before it spiked. And that's always kind of been, part of the industry, I guess. It kind of, in my mind, it gives the suppliers a reason to raise their price, when we run into a COVID, situation, but they never come back to the levels, I always am amazed when gas prices get back down to that, $2 or $2.50 price. I'm like, I never thought I'd see that again in my life.
Right.
So
Right. I think people are hoping that with the mortgage rates, right,
yeah.
that they're going to come back down to 3 and 3.5% again. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I mean, on that note, and you and I've had this conversation before for the last few years, it's like, when is a good time to jump into the new home building process? Because either you're going to deal with mortgage rate increases or material price increases. And so if material prices level out and even start to come down a little bit, which I think has happened like with lumber over the last year, but mortgage rates kept on going up. So there's really no perfect time to jump in. It's just, you have to do it. If you're going to build, you just kind of have to agree to do it at some point.
Right. And, I've had clients say, hey, we're gonna wait for the market to come down a little bit before we decide to build. And normally they're living or currently living in a house. So if the market comes down for, let's say, material costs, typically that means the value of your home is coming down as well. So it's always this unilateral move. So it's just a matter of what I always say, you got to get on the merry-go-round. That's all I can tell you, because if you wait to sell your house at the high price, that also means the material costs and construction costs are at that high end. It's never going to work out that you can sell at the high end and build at the low end. It's just always equilateral.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so, I mean, so many people go through this process in their minds, and it's so good to have a builder who not only understands this, but can talk about this with your clients, and it's extremely helpful. So thank you for sharing all of that. Just want to remind everybody again, if you have any questions about the construction process, the custom home building process, feel free to put it in the chat. We did have one person ask if you're building homes anywhere in the U.S., in the Midwest. Jeff is from actually from my area, Lake Country, Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin, and you're mainly sticking in the southeastern Wisconsin region. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, I probably in a 5-county area, Waukesha kind of being the hub. I'm down in Racine, Kenosha, down Walworth, kind of to the south, and then moving north into Ozaukee in Washington County.
Okay, and honestly,
yeah,
folks,
it's
everything that Jeff talks about here is something that is applicable to any custom home build around the country. What I mean by that is the topics, and the way Jeff goes through his process and the things he's discussing specifically are to him and his company. But I think the topics and the questions you might want to ask if you are interviewing builders would all be the same. And so, of course, if you have any questions about finding builders in other parts of the country, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I might be able to help you there. So Jeff, we did work with you recently on a project with one of our clients, a longtime client of ours. We actually worked with her and her husband on an existing home they had a couple of times over the last decade, and they decided that it was time to build their dream home. And because of health issues, it was decided that it's going to be a healthy home project. I wanted to get your opinion on some of the things, the challenges that you faced, not specifically on materials per se, but on the process, and how maybe in the future, customers who are looking to do something similar, maybe they can utilize the lessons learned here and maybe make things simpler for them down the road.
Sure. I mean, anytime the healthy home concept is, and to me, I know if you've been working on it obviously for a long time, but it still feels to me like it's in its infancy. And when it's doing that, or when we're starting out so new, it's really, the challenges are getting everyone on board. And it's not the clients, that's the easy part for them to understand the benefits. It's all the contractors that are actually doing the work. That's the challenge, because now we're trying to introduce new methods and new products to them that they've never used before. And it's like, it's pulling teeth, trying to get them to use these products. And especially when you're in a very busier environment where they're busy, they don't want to take the time to understand how to either use a product or the benefits of a product, or how to install a product, because they're so busy doing their normal everyday, what they've been doing forever. They just want to keep doing that. And so to throw in a monkey wrench and say, okay, we're going to use this product, and we'll pay for the material, but we want you to use it. Sometimes they're afraid to do that, just because they don't know how. A perfect example was paint. The subcontractor never used some of the products, so he was really worried and concerned about the long term of that product because it doesn't have a history with him. So it's just a matter of educating them. And sometimes it puts the onus a little bit more on myself, and that's where you're such a great resource to explain to them the benefits of it and or how it's going to work, because you've used it not only here but other parts of the country. But that's really the biggest challenge, is trying to I guess train the subcontractors what to use and how to use it.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly put. I remember one of the very first projects I was ever on years ago. We actually had a conference room full of subs and suppliers, and we all got together the same day in that conference room and said, all right, guys, here's the focus of what we're trying to do. We're trying to, and this is actually wasn't a healthy home project. It was a healthy commercial job. It was for a organic food store in Milwaukee. And everybody sat at the table and raised questions and concerns, and we all sort of talked it out. This was probably in the early 2000s, and there was a lot of questions back then. It's actually probably similar to questions that are now. But to get everybody together and to see other trades, the plumber was next to the electrician, was next to the carpenter, next to the roofer, and they all had similar concerns, and it kind of made it easier than after the first question for more hands to raise and ask more, because now they know, okay, well, they're not too proud to ask. I can ask too. The situation that most of my clients get into around the country is, well, the painting contractor or the HVAC contractor said he'll do it, but he's not going to warranty anything. And now, so my response to that is, then find another contractor, because if they're willing to take your money for the work that they do, but then completely wipe their hands of it, that gives them carte blanche to just do a lousy job and then say, I don't know, it must have been the material. And so I can specifically state to your subcontractors that I talked to, they ask questions. They were inquiring about the application or the installation. They wanted to know more, because it sounded to me that they were more invested into this than sometimes happens, where they're being forced into a healthy project and being forced into using materials, and they just do it. They don't even read the label. They just do it. And so I guess the point would be for everybody here, if you are involved in a project like this, understand that you're going to get pushback. It's logical. I mean, these contractors, they get paid to do a job. They know with all their experience how much work they're going to get done in a day. They know what their production levels are, and any wrench thrown into that situation is going to cause delays, and delays they don't get compensated for. And so I perfectly understand their pushback on this. The ones who sort of buy into the project are the ones who will ask questions, maybe even take some time. Heck, I think with your painting contractor, Jeff, we actually worked with him, and he did a number of test applications so that he understood exactly what he was getting himself involved with before he did the project. And when he came back to get more materials and so forth, he said, boy, these are really nice products to work with. I'm very happy with how they're working out. So that makes a big difference in how the overall project goes.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And again, it's just taking the time to educate yourself, or the subs to educate themselves. And once they, if they have the time to do that, I think they'll recognize and understand that, hey, these aren't products to be afraid of. It's just a matter of, we're just so used to the mainstream products. Hey, now we have another product that works just as well, but now it's a healthy alternative, which is just a great selling point for not only me, but for them. So that moving forward, it's just a matter of word of mouth. And it's like, hey, you should use this guy or this painter because he uses this product, and it's a better product for us in the long term.
Yeah, excellent. Anything you can glean from that project, and I know you have other clients that you're working with that we've talked with, maybe for future projects, future healthy home projects. And honestly, I would love to be in a position in this industry where we don't even use the term healthy home. It's just a home. I use the term traditional building versus healthy home, and that actually puts a bad light on traditional building. And what I mean by that is I've worked with thousands of clients over the years around the country, and I can tell you that 98% of what's done on a traditional custom home build is perfectly acceptable in my eyes. It's that last 2% where you have to make some really tough choices. And this all depends on the individual client themselves. They may have a sensitivity to certain chemicals. They may have a sensitivity to mold. They may have a sensitivity to bacteria. It could be an issue with sound, with electromagnetic fields. So every client is a little bit different. But I guess at the end of the day, at the end of this project, has there been some lessons learned and maybe some things that you could incorporate into future projects that just make common sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and some of the products that I use on a day-to-day basis are almost becoming that which are healthy are almost becoming the norm. And again, it's just going to take some time. A perfect example is the exterior wall sheathing. That Advantech type of product is just it's a healthier product to begin with. It maybe costs a little bit more than your traditional OSB with Tyvek over the top of it, but it's now providing a healthy benefit for the client at a marginal cost difference. And I mean, there are definitely benefits for that particular example. Is now I don't have to put that Tyvek paper over the wall sheathing because it's kind of built into the product. Now it's still a newer product, meaning 5, maybe 10 years old. So it's really, you're seeing more and more of it because it's becoming a product that every client or clients want to use. But it's still kind of new. But once you understand or explain the benefits, and once it has had a foothold where it's kind of proven its worth, then it's going to become the norm. And again, that's always the I don't know, I don't want to call it a problem, but the challenge with new products is it needs to prove its worth, its longevity. I can remember back 20 years ago, literally, I built a house right next to my dad, and I put the traditional cedar siding on because I'm a wood guy, and that's the way to do it. And that's kind of right when the fiber cement product Hardy Plank came out, and my dad put it on his house, and I'm like, I'm not putting concrete on my house. Are you kidding me? Well, that was probably the dumbest mistake I ever made in my life, or decision, because it's now turned out to, it's proven its worth, and it's something that I mean, I don't push it, but I highly recommend it because I just think it's a great product because of its long-term life versus using traditional cedar siding, which has so many maintenance issues with it, where you don't have that with a fiber cement. So it's, again, it's some of the products that we're using, it's just going to take some time to catch up because of its, it's a newer product in the industry, and people just don't understand it. And not that they don't want to understand it. It just takes us, you educating people, taking me to educate clients that this is why we should use this product. And there's a particular reason that we do that. And ultimately it's a better product for us.
Sorry about that, Jeff. I think I accidentally muted you there at the end. I have you unmute for me. It's funny you bring up fiber cement because that's the exact same scenario I was going to say. It's fiber cement siding. Look at that. When that first came out, people just thought it was going to be horrible. It's so heavy. It's going to absorb moisture and retain moisture. And it's turning out that it is becoming quite the norm. And now all other siding materials are kind of compared to that. So Heather brought up a good question, and I'm curious to know, now that you've gone through this process, are there any standard practices that you would recommend contractors start with? Now, let's say our audience right now are the contractors themselves. What are the maybe first 2 or 3 standard practices that you would say this would go a long way into creating that healthier home scenario? Now that you've gone through the process, what do you think your thoughts are there?
Yeah, there's a couple really simple ones that, I mean, really don't affect any of the subcontractors. The very first one I always think about is, when we rough in a house and we're running electrical wiring through the walls and plumbing in that, we have to caulk the penetrations for fire, it's considered a fire stop. And normally they just pick up the cheapest caulk they can find and just use that to fill the gaps where people really don't understand that there's off gassing from that product. So you sell a perfect example that is, virtually the same cost that we can use to caulk these, gaps in that without the off gassing. That is just so simple. And it really doesn't affect, it's not a issue of how the product, works or acts. It's just the benefit of the off gassing that makes such a big difference. So that's the one that really stands out, is super easy for me to kind of pick out. We talked about the Advantech, the zip wall. I mean, that's another one that's, just super easy to just include that as part of a project. And again, it's still a sell, and you and I are always selling, and it's and trying to get and educate a client, but ultimately they're paying for it, so they get to make the decision, I guess, is the way to put it. But those are some two really simple ones. There was a push years ago. I would probably say in the late 90s, early 2000s, with air exchangers. And there was a value to that, a cost. But the benefit is it's constantly exchanging the inside air with the outside air. So, back in the early 2000s, you don't realize how important that was because of all the off-gassing products. Now, obviously, everything's getting better with the products that we're using, and it's much more water-based products, so you don't have as much off-gassing, but we still need that air exchange. But there's a price tag that goes with it, and that's where it gets difficult for clients, unless they're really conscious about their health issues and trying to maintain a really healthy air in the house, to include that. And I'm guessing, if I remember, it's about a $2,500 to a $3,000 ad. It's another piece of equipment that you have to maintain, but the benefits, the health benefits of putting something like that in a house are just gigantic.
Yeah, and I have to agree with your points on these. I mean, they are you think of things like caulking materials and adhesives, they're used all throughout the home during construction. You have to remember that these materials will continue to off gas anywhere from 2.5 to 4.5 years after they reach a full cure, which means, that's at least, a year to 3 years after the homeowners have moved in. And so, those are those little bits that create that chemical soup inside of the home. It's been estimated between 8,000 to 15,000 chemicals can be in the air after a new home construction. And it's because of these little things that all start to add up. So making small incremental changes does make a difference. I just did a podcast yesterday, and she says, asked me, what is the least expensive thing you can do in your home today to make it healthier? Well, I would say, well, there's one thing you can do absolutely for free, which is take your shoes off at the door. Because you're bringing in pesticides and mold on the bottom of your shoes, and who knows what else. That makes a big difference right there. Not wearing your outside shoes around the house. But in the construction process, obviously making these small incremental changes. I would also say utilizing things like air scrubbers to get rid of dust during the process makes a bigger difference in the end of the job cleanup. And so we always look at that too, is like, what can we do during the process to make that the end of the day, right before the clients move in, it's going to be easier for them. And that's one of the things too, air movement, utilizing fans to blow dust out of the house, so it's not settling in little nooks and crannies and crevices that eventually makes its way in, becoming airborne. that's a very good incremental change that can be made. So Heather, I hope
Right.
that answered your question.
And one of the other things that it's really been a hard sell, which we did use on that the house down in Caledonia, is the fresh air intakes.
Mm.
Typically they're at grade, or maybe a foot above grade. This particular house, because of the client and her understanding of how it's bringing in that fresh air, is we actually snorkel them up about 4 feet.
Mm.
So there's pros and cons to everything. So the pro is now we're bringing in healthier air because it's not bringing up the microorganisms from the ground. The con is now it's maybe a little bit more unsightly because now you usually have a minimum of 2 fresh air intakes coming in. Now either you have to conceal them or you try to place them where they're not as visible. But again, everything that we do in construction, whether it's something as simple as that, aesthetics or healthy, there's pros and cons to everything typically, and it's just deciding what is more important to you as a client.
That's a great point. I'm working on a project right now in Florida, the incorporated fresh air intakes or air exchange systems, and now the house has absolute problems because they didn't factor in the Miami humidity into this process, and the air is not being dehumidified properly. So yeah, it is definitely a situation. Mark just asked, do you have a suggestion for the healthiest type of HVAC system to heat and cool the home if somebody is sensitive to dust and mold? And obviously that was a big concern for our client, and that's a huge concern for clients around the country. What is your opinion on that? What's the healthiest type of HVAC system?
Really, the healthiest would have radiant in-floor heat. So that works well for the heating portion of it. Because now you're not pushing that air around like you do with a typical forced air system. So a lot of the homes that we build today will still have the forced air system, but the primary heat is the radiant heat. Now, the con to that is there's a huge expense with doing that. When you take if you take an average 3,000 square foot footprint, you're probably adding about $40,000 onto the cost of the project to do the radiant heat. But the benefit of that is now we don't have that forced air pushing, all the dust and air around, which, some people have problems with or issues. So that's probably the best part. And with that, you have to do what's called a space pack, where you have basically an air handler up in your attic that is connected to your air conditioner, and that's what pushes or brings the air conditioning to the home. Now, the negative of that, I guess, is you have these little round 2-inch ports, in all the rooms that some people might consider unattractive. And then you have to plug them in the wintertime so you don't have the cold air coming through. But that's probably your best route when it comes to heating and cooling healthy wise. Now, in today's world, we almost always still, if we do the radiant heat, we'll always do the forced air furnace. And that is the backup to the radiant in case the radiant, breaks down for some reason, or the boiler. Now you still have heat with that forced air, but the main purpose of it now is that air, or that furnace, is now used for the air conditioning. So that's the only time the air is being pushed around. And honestly, a lot of people with health concerns aren't using air conditioning because they don't want to close up that house. So they would rather, it's there in case of extreme situations, but a lot of times they're opening up windows and they'd rather have that healthier situation than closing up the house.
Well, and that's a perfect example of how every client is different, and so a lot of listeners from all around the world actually, and so they're living in different clients. And here in southeastern Wisconsin, yeah, I mean, it's going to get cold in the middle of winter. It could be 20 below zero, and if you're trying to keep your house at 70, sometimes a radiant system just isn't going to keep there, depending on where you are. If you're up on top of a hill and there's a lot of wind pushing at the house, the other thing is, to have both systems means that you can also use a variable speed blower, so that throughout the year, whether there's a load requirement for heating or cooling, the air can still be moving in the home, which means that air is going through the purification system. So that adds that component. So you're exactly right. I think that those who do a radiant heat system always have to couple that with another forced air system. So it doubles the cost of your HVAC system. But this is not necessarily true in all climates, of course. And so I just want to put that caveat there. Um, Follow-up question Mark had is, are there any EMF or dirty electricity concerns with radiant floor heating? Well, it depends. With traditional hydronic radiance, no, there is not. You've got a glycol water solution pushing through tubes. So there's no EMF issue with that. With most, I would say most, with some electric in-floor mats that are used for maybe bathrooms or kitchens, you can get those EMF free. There's a company called SunTouch that does a completely EMF free electric mats. So that is something you would have to ask your contractor or subcontractor who's working on the project. Another question to that was, what about ones who are so sensitive they can feel the slight electric fields from the fluids flowing through the heating pipes? That's something you have to work out with the electrical contractor, because common knowledge is that as water flows through a pipe, if it's running in perpendicular to an electric line, the water can then carry the electromagnetic field further down the line. So that's something that has to be planned in the schematic stage. And this is why, going all the way back to the start of our construction, you need an architect, and these things need to be talked out beforehand. There's always ways around these things, but one thing I will caution everybody is, it's impossible to build a home that is 100% completely healthy on all aspects. It's impossible. You will drive yourself to the poorhouse or the nut house, one of the two or both. You have to pick and choose what your battles are, and then we create the plan based upon what those answers are. So, Jeff, before we get going here, first of all, any other questions that you might have, folks, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on this. What do you see for the short term and long term of the building industry? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, do we incorporate, because of the lack of labor around the country, do you see more builders and more customers discussing things like prefab components, pre-panelized homes? Is this something that maybe you'd look into in the future if, let's face it, the good carpenters in this country, they're not getting younger. And so how do we move forward with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. When it comes to multifamily, that the prefab and pre-construction of walls is pretty prevalent. And it just hasn't quite made it to the residential portion of it. It may someday. Obviously, the benefit, if you can do something like that, is you can really enclose that building fairly quickly. If some of the houses that we build, even at an average house, you're talking about 3 to 4 weeks before you're even putting roof shingles on. So it's really open to the environment, where if you can prefab it, now you can maybe do this in half the time, but it's going to be a challenge, especially, again, that's one of those things, again, is just really educating the framers, saying, hey, this is a positive, versus they're so used to hand framing everything on site. Now, to kind of step back, I think that the labor industry is going to change, and it's already on the rebound. I've always said it took 20 years to get us into the position where we had a labor shortage, but I think that everyone recognizes that now, especially in the industry, and there's a huge push to reverse that. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take another 10, 15 years to get there. But I think that we as a society are understanding that not everyone is meant to go to college. And there's men and women out there that absolutely love to be outside and pounding nails or doing electrical, any of the trades that are involved with building a new home. So I think that there's going to be a resurgent of craftsmen over the next 10, 15 years. And it's starting at a very young age in grade school now. Perfect example, the Lakeland Builders Association, and actually a lot of the builders associations are having these they're not seminars, but they're projects where you bring in all these different trades, whether it's a mason or an excavator, but they bring all these trades to like the State Fair Parking as an example, and the kids get to do hands-on, and it's getting excited about doing this kind of work at an early age where, you know, a teenager can go sit in a backhoe and actually start moving the controls in that. And I mean, that's something really simple, but I really believe that the shortage that we have now is going to correct itself. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, you bring up a good point in the fact that it's taken 20 years. I mean, this goes back to the recession, you know, 2009 to 2012. We lost a lot of good contractors during that time, and the industry never fully recovered from that when the pandemic hit. So it was, you know, doubled that situation. So it's really good to hear that things are on the rise, and I applaud that effort at the grade school and high school levels, because there are so many kids that just have such a way with their hands that those can be put to such good use in the field, in the trades, and I'm really looking forward to that. I just want to quickly share my screen with everybody here because I want to show you Jeff's website. And so you should be able to see the screen right now. This is actually an article written about the home we were discussing here in Wisconsin. That was a healthy home project that Jeff was a builder on, and I was involved with. Really good article on the process, some nice pictures of what the home looks like. You can see the nice cold Wisconsin weather there in the picture. It was, you know, every job I've done over the years, I continue to say this, it's a learning curve, because again, these are custom home projects. They've never been done before, at least not this way. And so we're always learning. I've been at this myself for 32 years. And once I stop learning, I'm done. Then it's time to retire. I've learned more in the last 3 years because of the pandemic and because of people's requirements changing than I have in the previous probably 20 years. So I think it's a very exciting time to be in this industry right now. I think that if you are looking to jump into a home building project, a healthy home building project, it's a good time to do it, because contractors around the country are starting to realize that this is what a large portion of their clientele is looking for. And if you have any difficulties with that, that's where folks like myself can help out and become that liaison between you and the builder, you and the architect, so that we can get this home built properly and get it built in a healthier manner and hopefully maintaining the budget. So Jeff, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. It's obviously a pleasure working with you and your crew on projects, but I look forward to having you back on the show at some time.
Well, again, thank you for having me. And I honestly look forward to doing this again.
Fantastic. All right, folks. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next week for another episode of Non-Toxic Environments. Take care, everyone.